Buongiorno, my dear viewer, or as we say here in America, get the hell off my property. Today, I'm going to recite to you a story you are most likely going to take to heart, because it is a cautionary tale of what happens when you put a bunch of incompetent crewmates onto the same station when literally anything happens to it. I was granted the ignoble title of Research Director, Christopher Langdon Brandon, otherwise Chris Brandon. I did my normal get-up whereby I put my mask into my backpack, yada yada, take off that god-awful lab coat, and replace it with the winter coat. My job? Simple. Guide the science department to a utopia of a singularity. And if it blew itself up on the way, just cover it up so that security doesn't beat my head in with a lead rod. The shift at the station started as it always does. The chefs were arguing at each other why blending meatballs was a crime against God. I checked the crew manifest, and it turns out Nanotransit decided to send us a clown instead of any sort of fucking medical personnel, so that's a sign of things to come, really. The clown started his tomfoolery by trashing all of the tools widely available to the public. Of course, that would never, ever, ever go wrong. I, however, salvaged any amount of tools that I could find, which thankfully filled out my tool belt. This newly acquired arsenal of tools at my disposal allowed me to aid the cooks that needed to get into botany to grow and serve raw wheat to go along with their uncooked ground meatballs. After doing such deeds, I then took the best item in the game, along with some cigars, and went down to the bar to see if anything interesting was gonna happen. Upon discovering that the only interesting thing happening in the bar was the clown throwing a banana at the cooks we had, I decided to shake things up a little bit. I opened the bar to the public with a slight caveat. Anyone who wanted these free drinks would have to go through the gladiatorial combats of a rage cage I was producing. This rage cage would have people fight to the, near death for alcohol. It was a foolproof plan. Well, foolproof all up until a blob decided to greet our station with its blobbiness? I don't really know how to describe abominations of nature. The crew responded to this existential threat, as I'm sure you would, with a quick and swift, "Oh dear God, we're going to die if this thing isn't destroyed." They quickly got to pilfering the EVA room full of hard suits, grabbing toolboxes, and bugging security to no end to find this thing and kill it. However, I was also part of the science team, so I quickly ran into the robotics laboratory, gave myself a shiny new pair of legs, and ran on down to where people were saying the blob was. Now, thankfully, the blob was as effective as a wet sock against a brick wall, and the blob decided to go to a very far corner of the station, actually, in fact, detached from the station, and grow there. The only problem is he needs to take over the station itself to win, so essentially the blob was nothing. Of course, we expected more fanfare, but the incessant banging on the blob's core caused it to just disintegrate. And before the crew could tackle the daunting task of returning to everyday life, a lot of the crew had some injuries, being in space and fighting a gigantic mass of organs and whatnot. And this is also the part where that lack of medical staff I jokingly mentioned earlier in the video comes up in full force, because now we didn't have a medical staff, nor did we have a captain nor an HOP to access medical supplies at all. And the only person on the station who seemed to have all access was the quartermaster, who just stole it, and he was doing his own thing. Mainly ordering a bunch of shotguns and portaling it to security, I guess. I was very confused by that. And as everything began returning to normal somewhat, I decided to resume my rage cage, as, I needed something to do. And as the rage cage was finished, the clown decided to hop into the gladiatorial arena, and our first battle was witnessed. The clown versus a plushy snake. The results, I won't lie, are interesting. The clown not only lost, he died. I cloned our unfortunate loser, and Nanotransm decided to send us a genetics console, so I decided to play the most riveting gameplay in the entire world. And I won't lie, my eyes were beginning to droop, but fortunately... So, yeah. My Sudoku game was rudely interrupted by either a blob that generated after the first one had died, or just a second one that was a late bloomer. Safe to say, I wanted to have this one burned at the stake because no one interrupts my goddamn Sudoku game. Anyways, I made a quick pit stop at the kitchen to fuel up, and quickly noticed two things. One, the first wave of people who went against the first blob were damaged and could not have access to any medical supplies, and secondly, this blob was competent. A third thing I learned later down the line was that blob was actually the former quartermaster, the same quartermaster who had all access. Now armed with the knowledge that all hope of medical supplies were washed away in a sea of blobbiness, I shortly called the shuttle, just to see how competent the station was at taking out the blob. If we took it out early, we get to go home, after some leisurely pace. If we didn't, things would go very south very quickly. Upon hearing how close the blob was to my dorm, I rushed over to save the one thing near and dear to me that wasn't breaking human rights. Then I found out, scarily enough, that it wasn't just close, it was breaking down my quarters, so I rushed out and I hollered at the crew. Guns were passed out to the public, and security had enough of the shit, so they walked outside and started firing. I followed closely in pursuit with the rage of a god, and I quickly found out that I had space cancer or something, so I collapsed and I was rushed to the medical office. Well, more of a makeshift medical office. In reality, it was a chemistry lab being operated by one of my lackeys, a scientist, and a botanist. However, before I was dragged to medical, I saw that the station was in a rapidly deteriorating condition. With that in mind, I proposed to the nearest person around me that they carry my corpse onto the escape shuttle if I don't make it. And as my barely conscious body watched in awe as the quote-unquote chemistry team was trying to do literally anything with me, it started to become a reality that my lifeless husk of a corpse was going to land on that hunk of junk that was arriving to the station shortly. However, the botanist in chemistry saw the writing on the wall for me and dragged my quickly dying body onto the escape shuttle, whereby all of the members thought they would leave scot-free. And unfortunately, yet again, circumstances come to bite us in the ass, as the knowledge of a still growing massive blob outside of science consumes the minds of everyone inside of the shuttle as they cannot leave. But as the saying goes, death comes for everyone, and Chris Brandon is not an exception. And so ends his tale on this miserable station that at first saved itself and then somehow managed to fuck that up. Well, I also guess Chris Brandon wasn't the only one to suffer on this station, so there's that.